Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Brittany and Ivan from the Ugly Barn Farm. So do you guys want to tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Oh, wait, we should back up and show them our tacky t-shirt matching.
We planned it.
We did plan it.
Perfect.
It wasn't an accident. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Brittany. I'm one of the owners of the Ugly Barn Farm. Kind of.
Yeah.
I do a lot of unpaid work. And you go ahead.
So we're a small scale mushroom farm. We grow indoors year round, up to 19, possibly 20 different species now, not all at the same time. We'll cycle them through with the seasons. We also have some outdoor growing beds, I guess, somewhat, with Kingstropharia, and then some temporary structures that we grow in on the shoulder seasons.
So mostly spring and fall.
Yeah, spring and fall. We grow through the summer, but weather isn't great for growing because it's really hot, and they're outdoor structures. They're like tempo garages, right? Okay. So we can't like cool the area down. We can't do anything that'd be required to get more yields or better product out of that. So shoulder seasons are best because the temperatures are right, bugs aren't around. So we do that.
And then the other mushroom focus that we don't cultivate, but we do a lot of foraging, our family and our farm as well, just for not so much for business, but a lot for mental health. We do some education, so some courses and things like that in the fall, and somewhere that's where we'd like to keep growing. So we probably have well over 19 or 20 species with what we forage as well for mushrooms.
Oh, wow.
And also sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, oh, wow. Yeah, that's it. Sorry to derail you.
The courses also, like the foraging courses that we give out, definitely help to just make people more aware of what's out there and help strengthen the whole food community here in the north. I find a lot of people are doing it in North Bay, and I think a few other people are doing it here in Sudbury, which is great because, like you mentioned, you have a focus on resiliency, and I think this definitely is one of those things that helps out with that.
Yeah, so you were mentioning that you do a lot of the foraging yourself, and you were saying that the 20 species up to maybe that you were foraging. That's why I said, oh, wow, because I was thinking, like, on top of what you guys have for a variety that you're growing and cultivating, you also have access to this variety because you have that knowledge in the wilderness there. So, like, that must also be, like, dependent on the seasons, too, when you're harvesting those mushrooms and stuff. So, like, what would you sort of start out with in the spring and then go through for the picking, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, well, with the focus mostly being on mushrooms, we hunt for morels in the spring, but we never find them.
Yeah, we're the worst morel foragers ever.
But that's generally what you would start with. Oyster mushrooms, which are a cultivated species as well, do really well in the spring. So you can find those in the wild as well, but we don't usually pick them from the wild. They're usually pretty buggy, so we stick with the cultivated ones, and just do a second flush or third flush outside.
Pheasant back.
And then pheasant back is one of the wild species. They do grow on wood, so we can cultivate them. We brought some logs from ones that had been fallen trees back to the farm and kind of put them in a similar environment. So we get pheasant back mushrooms sometimes growing. And those are friends of ours have called them the Morel consolation prize because they are nowhere near as good as morels, but they're a pretty nice consolation prize when you're hunting, and they grow, although they don't grow in the soil, like in the ground, they grow on wood. They tend to grow similar. You'd be hunting in the same areas, yeah, and then the same time frame. So
habitat and time frame for sure.
Yeah, spring is not limited for mushrooms. There's quite a few other ones. Those are the biggest ones that we've found in enough quantity to make it exciting, but it just kind of starts to remind you that it's that time of year, what the summer will bring. Reishi is a medicinal mushroom that you pick in late spring, so about June, depending on the year. It can be late June or early June. Not so good for eating.
No, it's like shoe leather, like a really bitter shoe leather. So you do extracts with that one. You don't so much cook with it. Some folks will throw it in soup and broths and things like that, so you can get a good water extract out of it. But it is very bitter.
Yeah, it's not a gourmet eating one, that's for sure.
Highly medicinal, so tinctures are great. Teas are tolerable. Foods are disgusting.
And the first time we found that one, we started looking because it was the right season for it. We knew where to look. They grow, the wild species that we have here grow specifically on dead or dying hemlock. And the first time we found it, it was like this glowing mushroom on a log. The sun was like coming through the trees onto this fallen log covered in moss, and the reishi was just like
the canopy was thick enough to create like a really nice shaded area.
Yeah.
Just at this spot.
But just at that one spot, there was sun just illuminated the reishi. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how if you give nature to give you a chance, you do get sort of a storybook moment like that, eh? Like that's kind of a cool thing to have it happen just like that, where you're like, oh wow, there it is right there with the sun right on it. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to introduce Naga. This is our farm dog. He's a pest that loves as much love as he can possibly get. Even though he was meant to be a farm dog, stays outside. He doesn't.
Yeah, he spends winters inside.
He's now aging and has decided that he's a house dog. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a Great Pyrenees here at home and we're in the city. So another farm dog, but does well in the house. And
Nice.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. They like their outside time, that's for sure. But he does like the cuddles that come along with being an inside dog.
So what are the mushrooms that you guys sell and the species that you have?
So we've got, like I said, 19 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start off. Oh, also, I just want to step back. When I said the food is disgusting with the reishi, I was doing it just to kind of be funny, but you could put reishi in like brownies and stuff like that and actually make it taste good. And like I said, some people put it in soups in smaller quantities and it balances nicely. Yeah. So I just want to go back to that. But anyhow, so the species we grow, I think we have like 7 or 8 different types of oysters. Oysters are definitely the easiest mushroom to grow. They're super forgiving. They grow very aggressively, which makes them a great competitor against other molds, which is always what you're fighting against, right? Like that's why you have to do it in an environment that's HEPA filtered, mostly free of other contaminants. Mm-hmm. But oysters just happen to do that very well. So we have like brown oysters, yellow oysters, occasional pink oysters, king oysters, black oysters, white oysters. I'm not going with the Latin names either. I'm just saying that so I don't come off as too much of a nerd. But if you want the Latin names, I'll give you those. God, what other oysters we have?
I think there's just a few other like phenotypic variable ones. They're the same species, but they vary slightly in color. These are actually distinct species that
well, the black oyster and the white oyster are actually
elm oyster though.
Yeah, the elm oyster is a little bit different for sure.
But I don't know if I agree with you fully that it's an easy one to grow in terms of like lab culturing and growing it out on blocks, but sometimes it can actually be a really tricky one to grow because in the summer that one is the most finicky for temperature. When it gets too hot, you get really poor quality mushrooms, and then really in the winter with pests. When it's -30 outside, it still needs like as much fresh air exchange as it can get, and so it can be really tricky to properly ventilate the rooms, although they cool down enough that it's not as much of an issue. If it's as long as the temperatures aren't too high, in the building itself, it's not that big of an issue. We have a better time growing it in the winter time.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to grow it in the wintertime. I find fresh air exchanges, you don't have to give them as much the cooler it is.
It's cool. With
Like
it grows slower, but
that's right. So we're kind of jumping all over the place here.
That's fine.
Just
Great.
finish off.
We're
Okay, that's
following.
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Mushrooms will throw off CO2 as they grow, as they incubate, as they colonize or myceliate the substrate. They'll throw off CO2. Even when they're fruiting, they'll throw off CO2, and that CO2 is detrimental to their growing. So you need lots of fresh air. So as they develop in a high CO2 environment, their stems tend to get very lanky because they're growing to search for that fresh air, right? So they'll get longer and longer until they find it, and then they'll develop their caps, their pileus. But as a result of using a lot of that energy to develop their stems, their caps are often like stunted, and they don't look like your typical mushroom would.
Right. That just kind of made me think, and maybe this is like, I don't quite understand it as well. But so like say the mushroom gives off a lot of CO2, and I guess maybe this environment wouldn't lend to that, but like, you know how plants really like CO2? Like I would almost think like if you had plants and say mushrooms growing sort of next to each other, there's sort of a reciprocal relationship there, but I don't know if that's like good for say the mushroom, or if I just think of that.
So there's definitely ways to do that.
I think the reason a lot of people don't do it is like the introduction of pathogens, right? Like bacteria from, or even pests, like if there's any if it's soil-based growing with the plants.
Right.
There's a lot of like fly eggs and things like that in the soil that will love to eat mushrooms. I think that's one of the main reasons.
I think that's a big contributing factor. Yeah, both I feel would have to be done in a fairly sterile environment where the soil is even somewhat sterilized to prevent any fungus gnats or any other molds from getting from the plant room to your mushroom room. And then vice versa. You don't want too many spores from your mushroom room getting into your plant room and causing whatever, any sort of contamination there. But if you did filter both sides, you could easily calculate the volume of CO2 produced based on your pounds of substrate and species, because they differ, right? Some species produce more CO2 than others.
Right.
You can calculate that CO2 and then grow whatever number of plants that you could sustain on that level of CO2. What those calculations are, I have no idea.
That's just kind of interesting as a project. If you turned a mushroom room into a CO2 generator for a grow room, say.
Yeah, you definitely could. It's pretty neat.
Other mushroom farmer friends have talked about doing some like algae growing, like a medicinal algae growing experiments. And those ones, and that way you wouldn't need like a soil-based media. You would just have it sort of growing in like glass jars or something like that. Anyways, we had spoken about, but
algae will also produce that CO2.
No, they'll produce oxygen.
Oh,
they photosynthesize too.
That's right. Ooh, embarrassing.
I didn't catch on.
But I think I think it's a good segue to talk about like go step back a little bit.
Let's keep talking about what we grow, all the species that we grow.
Okay.
This is 2 cups of coffee and too much. So all the other oysters we've named, there might be a few other in there. We'll have chestnut
mushroom, talk mushrooms, lion's mane. We've dabbled a little bit with a few cousins of lion's mane called cone's tooth. There's other
reishi, turkey tail, cordyceps.
These are all medicinal.
Those are the medicinal
primarily
ones.
medicinal species. Yeah.
In
the spring we'll be growing some more woodier mushrooms.
Oh yeah, the woodier. That's one of
look
the
like
new
an
ones.
ear basically, and
Yeah.
they're like this kind of gelatinous looking mushroom that it's basically like cartilage. This is the texture, the
Yeah.
best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Pretty flavorless, but pretty cool just
Yeah.
because it's so different. We've only had ones from the wild that friends have collected for us, and the ones we grew this year, our rooms were just too cold by the time we started it, so we didn't know that they needed like warmer temps. So we have the culture saved, and we'll probably do it again in the spring and hopefully have a little bit better results with it. But yeah, it was just a little too cold when we started it.
Yeah, we have like a generalized approach to growing where we have a lot of different species in a single room. So we have to make compromises, I guess, with yields for certain species because, you know, all the parameters of each species has to overlap, which means that some of them are getting their ideal temperatures and others are getting like, oh, maybe the border of they need warmer, but that's as cold as they'll go and still produce. Whittier, unfortunately, at the time that we started growing, just needed something warmer. But we're definitely excited to start producing that one in the spring and see how it does in our rooms at that point. I think it'll do pretty well.
A new one as well this year that we'll be doing, not so much in our grow rooms, but on dowels and hopefully outside we'll do some blocks, is Chicken in the Woods, which is a foraged one that grows on like dead or dying wood. So any of those kinds of species you can technically cultivate in a lab. Any of these species, including morels, some that are thought to not be like that you can't really cultivate, but you usually can't fruit them. So they might need an association with a living plant outside. Usually though, you can produce spawn for, I think, all species.
Yeah, you can produce spawn for,
including mycorrhizal species, which
Yeah.
are mycorrhizal being those ones that need a living plant in order to grow. The ones that we cultivate and fruit inside are those that grow on wood or saprotrophic. Specifically, ours grow on wood. And so they're able to fruit indoors. They don't need like another organism to associate with. They don't need a living plant species. Kingstropharia, which Ivan mentioned earlier, as one of the species that we grow. It grows outdoors in garden beds. It's a saprotroph, so it decomposes wood and soil, but it needs like a microorganism to associate with it to fruit. So some people grow it indoors by putting on top of the wood, it's called a casing layer. So they'll put soil basically on top of it. And some people have success that way.
The other way to get success with that one indoors is to transfer mycelium from your outdoor beds and put those on plates. So you can start them indoors in a lab, but until they make it outdoors and then come back indoors, they won't produce. Like we haven't looked too much into the Kingstropharia, but out of what I've looked into anyhow, that was one of the strategies to getting it to fruit indoors. Recently, actually, the Danish project, some twins in the Netherlands developed a way to produce morels indoors, which is really cool. Something to look forward to in the next short while, because I'm sure that's going to explode, at least maybe only in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if they're going to be exporting any of that here, but I think we'll start seeing that on the market.
And that's been ongoing. Like people have been cultivating morels or trying to cultivate morels indoors and outdoors for years. And in China, they've probably done a really good job, but they haven't necessarily shared the strains with growers around the world. So we can't necessarily access those strains that are going to fruit inside. So it's all, and a lot of it's patented techniques and things like that. So yeah, so we wouldn't necessarily be able to purchase those strains
or the techniques to doing it. Actually, an interesting thing with that Danish project is they chose not to patent their techniques because of the access that certain folks might have to those patents prior to like actual patenting. Like while it's in the process of patenting,
right,
apparently you can have access to that information. And they did a post on that on Instagram, worth checking out anyway. It's just an interesting inner workings thing. I found anyhow.
Well, it seems like mushrooms, what kind of got me interested into them a little bit more was I seen an interview with Paul Stamets, and he's a guy, I mean, he's as good a spokesperson for mushrooms as probably anybody. Like he kind of reminds me of like I think his name's Radagast from the Lord of the Rings, like the brown wizard. He sort of reminds me a little bit, like he shows up with his hat, which is made out of mushroom, and then he tells you like these amazing stories and tells you what mushrooms do and how they're like there's something like I almost never ever thought of really. And then you realize what sort of function they hold in nature and what balance they kind of keep. And it's kind of interesting that say China would have a way to sort of grow those inside, because I think it's a bigger part of their culture too. Like they utilize the medicinal uses and stuff like that. And it's a big part of their dishes and stuff too, I think.
Yeah, actually all of Asia, mushrooms in all of Asia are it's a big part of the culture, much more than it is here. So like you think like Southeast Asia also, just Asia in general has a fantastic mushroom culture. Yeah. And like also Eastern Europeans.
Oh, okay. So just
big there as well.
Probably more by the proximity, right? Like if it's more people in Asia, especially as you go out, you probably still have some contact with that sort of interculture.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So like some of the medicinal ones there, like some of them you guys make into tinctures there. So is a lot of that sort of supplemental? Is that sort of like, you got some inflammation, use this, or is there some variation in the kinds and how you would use them?
Supplemental like to our business, or supplemental for like a person's diet or
something? Yeah, sorry. Supplemental to like say your diet, like a health supplement kind of thing.
Yeah, so some of them, like a lot of the medicinal ones, like Ivan mentioned the reishi, it's not really a palatable mushroom to eat, so it wouldn't really be something that you could get into your diet without it being in like a supplement or a tincture form, right? So you can toss it in like a broth or something like that, but you're not going to really want to have that one. And a lot of the medicinals are like that. They're not really palatable. Turkey tails, like a tough polypore as well. Chaga, you guys have probably heard of or at least seen, is like this rock hard. Sclerotia. It's a different organ on the fungus. So a lot of them are that's the only way to really get them into your diet is through tinctures or some sort of an extract. But yeah, it's supplemental. I mean, if you cook and eat mushrooms, you're absorbing a lot of those beneficial nutrients that they have to offer anyways, right? So a lot of the gourmets overlap, like lion's nest one, even cordyceps. Actually, people will eat cordyceps. I've heard it's not as great fresh. It's not bad in a tincture.
They're developing. So in North America, some of the largest growers are in the United States. And they basically developed the market for cordyceps here in the West. And part of that is has to do with recipes and cooking and stuff like that too, because it's not currently being used that way. And I think they're just trying to develop more of a market for it. So not just for tinctures. The other thing I wanted to touch on is how like it is supplemental to a diet, because it's not magic. I don't know if I hit that hard enough. Maybe the delivery wasn't, but you still have to have like a good diet for it to work, right? Yeah. Like you can't be eating Burger King and chocolate bars and then take a dropper of cordyceps and run a mile or whatever. Like it's so definitely it works. It helps. Most of these medicinals are all immune boosting, and then they also play into like cordyceps interrupts this metabolic. Anyways, I'm not going to get into the whole thing. It's a whole other discussion, or we can get into it after.
I'd actually like to kind of hear that. That's because I find that really interesting.
Yeah. So there's this metabolic pathway. So some of this stuff isn't, I'm just kind of regurgitating from what I've read.
Yeah, that's fine.
So in joints, there's this compound that crystallizes on joints. which makes it hard. Like, what's that?
It's like
Aggravates your, it'll aggravate arthritis or just cause general joint pain and stuff like that. And whatever that process that causes that crystallization of that compound, cordyceps has been shown to interrupt that metabolic pathway, therefore reducing that compound on your joints or whatever.
Right.
But so that's one of the benefits to it. But in addition to that, it's just like, it's a fantastic immune booster. That chaga, reishi, oh God, like all of them, even lion's mane, which has been shown, like, I'm sure if you've watched an interview with Paul Stamets, I'm sure he talked about the cognitive benefits to using lion's mane.
Yep.
So like, in addition to just having a fantastic immune boosting potential, it also does that. You know, it helps improve cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment. They've used it in treatments for neurodegenerative diseases. There's a lot of information out there, like peer-reviewed journals, that type of information. There's also a lot of information, like Joe Blow put something on his website without any reference. So I would just steer clear of Joe Blow's website and go straight to Google Scholar for any information on that. I can't even remember how we got on that topic.
We were talking about the medicinal uses of them, and I was asking if they were supplemental to diet, and then then you got into how the cordyceps interrupted that process there.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention about, so Brittany was saying that a lot of them aren't palatable. So David Aurora is one of those reference books on identifying mushrooms, and in there he has a passage talking about how to prepare turkey tail to make it edible, because it's so
tough.
Yeah, it's very tough. So his recommendations are a slow boil for 69 hours.
Wow.
And I don't even know, his whole book is hilarious. Like, he throws a lot of funny passages in there. He's just a funny writer.
Yeah.
So I'm half inclined to believe that he's serious, though. To make it edible like that, you have to boil it for 69 hours.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show, like, you can't eat these mushrooms. You do extracts with them, and that's how you benefit from using these.
Yes.
I wanted to mention something a little bit general about mushrooms from that. So mushrooms then, the reason we talk about making extracts and these kinds of things so often is that consuming mushrooms raw is generally not, you're not going to get most of the nutrients out of them. So they have chitin in the cell walls. So usually when we cook them, we rupture the cell wall, and that allows us to access those nutrients a lot easier. So I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but we would access about 5% of the nutrients if you're consuming raw mushrooms. And often there's actually compounds that can be problematic. Never mind.
So like agaricus mushrooms.
So like the white button grocery store mushrooms have some hydrazine or hydrazine precursor that can be carcinogenic.
It's a hydrazine precursor called agarikine that's present in all agaricus species.
Okay.
So generally speaking, cooking your mushrooms, which is not always common knowledge, I guess. A lot of people eat raw mushrooms, and often people are on raw diets, so assume that not cooking your food is a better way to acquire the nutrients, but in the case of mushrooms, it is not. So, and then doing a full extract for if you were just looking for medicinal properties, is going to give you access to most all those nutrients, and then cooking them is going to be somewhere in between, because usually when we do a stir fry or something like that, we don't do a full extract. We'll do like just enough to break the cell walls and cook the mushrooms fully. So
just add something else to that. When we do our tinctures, actually I'll step back. Certain compounds degrade at certain temperatures, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So you just don't get the full benefits from it. So if you Sometimes you can cook your mushrooms lightly and you get more benefit from them. Other times you just want, like, it doesn't always have to be super healthy. Sometimes you can just have junk food. So you can batter them and deep fry them and they're awesome.
Right.
But chances are you're probably not getting all that good stuff because, you know, you've
Canceled it out.
yeah, you've deep fried them. So
Yeah.
they're super delicious that way though. But with your extracts, and this is the way we do our extracts, our tinctures, is through a double extraction procedure. So certain compounds are soluble in water, others are soluble in alcohol. So we start the process off with a hot ethanol extraction. And again, it's hot because you need that heat to break down those cell walls to extract everything out of them. And when I say hot, I mean like alcohol boils off at 78 Celsius or something like that. So it's not even boiling temperature yet. So a lot of those compounds are preserved because you're not hitting, you know, these 100 and whatever temperatures.
Right.
And it's probably also worth mentioning that the compounds that are soluble in alcohol they're probably not, or they're more sensitive than the ones that you would extract in water, right? Because those water soluble compounds are only going to come out once you have like you don't necessarily want to get it to a boil, but just below a boil, just to be able to extract that. So those compounds are probably preserved in the hot water because that's what's required of them. Folks are also doing cold water extractions. So some tinctures talk about triple extractions, and those are to capture all those volatile compounds, terpenes, specifically monoterpenes, and sesquiterpenes. So what those are, if you're standing over my booth, summertime, or you're walking towards it, you can smell, you know, mushrooms. Like sometimes it's a spicy smell, depending on the species. Actually, if it's pink oyster smell, you might be smelling dead fish or urine, which is why we only do that one occasionally. It's a hard sell, you know, middle of summer.
No, really trust me. Wait.
That's right. It tastes a lot better than that. I swear it does. But some of these mushrooms have like a really pleasant smell, and these smells are used to attract pollinators, because they're not actually pollinating, but they're just bugs that'll help carry the spores from one area to another. And the cold water extract actually helps preserve those and extract those without losing those volatile compounds, because the temperature isn't quite high enough to boil those off, right? So interesting fact. I guess that's on topic.
Yeah. So like, what got you guys into mushrooms? Because like when I looked into it a little bit, I found there was you had to have some like it seemed a bit technical, or maybe I was just intimidated by it, but it seemed like, especially when you're starting out with you need to have, like you said, the HEPA filtered area so that there's no contaminants and all that kind of stuff. And so like what got you guys, oh my goodness, I can't talk. What got you guys into it? What got you guys into it?
You start. So
Yeah.
I only got into it because of Ivan.
Dragged her down.
Yeah.
Or up, whatever.
So this is really Ivan's story.
So I struggle with this one because there's a story that I'll tell. Damn, you know what? I'm just gonna say it. So in high school, I grew magic mushrooms.
Okay.
And I was very successful at it. And at some point I was like, I'm old enough that I shouldn't be growing magic mushrooms. I should try my hand at something else. And at that point I was already, I was into the whole resiliency and self-sustainability. So I thought, and I was into permaculture, started reading about that. So it just kind of fit in. It developed, I guess, or matured along with me, but definitely it was because of the success and the confidence that growing magic mushrooms instilled. And I just took it from there. And you know what? I think I can almost guarantee that with 90% of growers, I'm throwing that number like just whatever, I'm throwing a high number out there, but most of their origin stories is probably with magic mushrooms.
That's funny too, because I remember with Paul Stamets and his story, one of his stories, he talks about, I think he had read a book about ethnogens or something like that. And then he got a hold of some mushrooms and he didn't know the dose. And he took I think he guessed 25 grams. And then he found himself stuck atop a tree in the middle of a thunderstorm and had this crazy spiritual experience. And he had a speech impediment, which made him stutter. And he stopped stuttering after that day, because he had this moment, I guess, up in the tree where he was thinking to himself, how silly is this? I'm going to die up in this tree in this thunderstorm and I can't even talk right to people. And so he's told himself he was going to stop stuttering, and he imprinted that in his mind, and then he stopped doing that. But it seems like him and a lot of other guys that are involved in that area, you're right, it does seem to start around magic mushrooms. And I mean, it's kind of interesting too, because if you look at especially our ancestors and different cultures all over the world, it's a crucial part of something that built our culture. I mean, there's some people who suppose that the fly agaric might be where our Christmas baubles come from, that the fly agaric may have been dried on evergreen trees for Yule. And there's other suggestions, say, I think in the Indian tradition that soma might have been something like a fly agaric or something like that. So I don't think it's really a coincidence that you find that. It seems to be more of a pattern, right?
Yeah, that and the stoned ape theory is a good one too.
Yeah, McKenna,
I'm not sure where I stand on all these. They're a little fantastical.
Yeah.
And I want to believe them. I think they're amazing theories.
You just don't know how well supported they are.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I can buy into something without it being well supported, but I just think there's so much more to it than it can't just they oversimplify evolution, I feel.
Yeah.
It can't possibly just be a group of early humans following a herd and picking mushrooms off their crap, No,
you're right.
There's got to be more to it than that. And that's why we are the way we are. Possibly, because once you do take them, you do have those, they're very, it's that, what's the word for when you have those religious,
spiritual experience, religious,
a spiritual experience. What's
epiphany? That? Epiphany, maybe?
Like a spiritual epiphany or a spiritual awakening or an encounter with God or whatever.
Right.
But actually, there's no but. I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're kind of right to point that out too. It is a bit fantastical in a way, but me, I've had experience with magic mushrooms before, and it wasn't even a big dose or nothing like that. But for me, it
wasn't 25 grams.
No, certainly not. But what it did, I found for me, was I was walking home from a friend's house, and I looked at my childhood school, and it was nighttime, and the way it was lit up, and to me, it was it just made it look so different and made me kind of think about the school different. It just, there was just something about it that, I don't know. I feel like it was a worthwhile experience. I feel like I got something positive out of it. And, that's all anecdotal, right? I just know that there seems to be a fair amount of people who have anecdotally good experiences with it. I just find it's interesting that happens there. But you are right. You don't want to read into it too much. You want to kind of try to be as sort of scientific thinking about it as you can be.
Yeah. And I'm willing to concede that at some point it's possible that, logic gives way to something more fantastical, I guess, or at the very least, that it would seem fantastical based on our current understanding of something, without getting into too much. shoot, there was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, you said it's all anecdotal, but there is empirical evidence with benefits to magic mushrooms right now. A lot of studies are being done at Johns Hopkins and other places.
Yeah, there's that MAPS study, I think it is there.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in conjunction with psychotherapy too, right?
Yeah, that's right. So
Microdosing?
Not necessarily, but that's another thing that people have been saying they do with psilocybin or other ones where they microdose, and I don't really know much about how much they're studying that, but
yeah, I haven't read too much of that, but as far as like PTSD relief, addictions, depression, I think this one's more anecdotal. Like somebody told me at the market that there was something about schizophrenia, but I'm more likely to lean towards it might produce schizophrenia as opposed to prevent it, like early onset, in the same way that cannabis use could cause early onset schizophrenia if it runs in the family, if you have a family history of it.
Yeah.
And psychosis, that's right.
that certainly makes sense, because you think about like say your subjective experience as a person versus what you believe reality to be, right? And if you're messing around with these substances, you can kind of split a rift between what is, objective reality and what you experience it as such.
Yeah,
that kind of makes sense, where it would kind of split your psyche like that. I'm just thinking for maybe being schizophrenic, right?
Yeah. I have a friend that's he's not schizophrenic, so I'm not trying to make light of that situation, but as far as a rift goes, I feel like he's living in between, like a limbo between reality and that rift.
Some people suggest that, like, well, I think it was Graham Hancock, one of his books that he wrote, it was called Supernatural. And he talked about, like, in some societies where they had, say, shaman, that was sort of the role the shaman would occupy. He was basically the person who would go between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And because the idea, I think, is as you keep going back to the land of the dead, you kind of maybe leave a little part of you behind and you sort of live in both worlds. Like, I think in some cultures, they even suggested that the shaman would have marriages in these altered states or in these altered realms. And so they would have a spouse that existed in this other reality or experiential reality. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff with human history and human psychology and how all these things kind of develop together. We're pretty interesting when you look at us, I think.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Yeah, we went off on a tangent there, though. Suddenly our growing experiment was our trip experiment, maybe.
Yeah, well, I kind of fall into tangents sometimes. I'm bad for that.
Oh, I love it. That's basically every conversation with me ever. We might start talking about mushrooms and end up talking about exactly that. Well, I mean, that's not such a far leap, but that's every conversation with me. So I welcome that.
Yeah. And like for me, like even if there's some parts of that that's fantastical too, it also makes me think that because we've understudied a lot of these things, and like say even just medicinal mushrooms in the Western culture, that's a technology that basically we've underutilized, right? Especially when you consider how much it's used in Eastern cultures. And then it goes the same too for like, some people say part of what happened in the 1960s was in part due to the exposure of, say, LSD and psilocybin. And so that might be another technology that, if used properly, could aid in the further development of sort of human culture, right?
Yeah.
And
are you talking about like civil movements?
I think some people think, well, at least there was two things going on at the same time, that there were people in the civil movements in the 60s, say in the States, and there was a lot of use of psychedelic drugs. And some people think that there might be a sort of correlation. They were at least happening at the same time. And I wonder if maybe that's where some of the strict clampdown happened, right? Because if unmitigated, that sort of technology can totally upend the culture, right? Yeah. So but
That's right.
it might be something that we're learning now in conjunction with psychotherapy in the proper set and setting that might actually be a useful tool for helping people with PTSD and other sort of traumas or whatever else.
Yeah, I agree.
But, yeah, I think
Well, it does make sense that you kind of started there and the skills just kind of transferred, right? Like it's probably
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Sophia. I couldn't remember how we got on that,
It's
but
all
that's
good.
exactly where it was. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So that's basically how I started. And then, like I said, it evolved from, well, it didn't evolve because it's the same thing, but I mean, I just moved from magic mushrooms to gourmet mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms and started learning about all that stuff. And a lot of that is due to like falling down a rabbit hole, starting out with Paul Stamets, then Trad Cotter and Peter McCoy and all these other leaders in the industry, at least spokespeople for the industry. Those folks don't actually, I don't think they lead any of the research themselves. I could be wrong there, but I'm fairly certain that they don't.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's kind of cool how life journeys kind of go like that, right? You start off in one place and you just got to kind of keep going forward, and then you turn what you were doing into something else, and it's, I don't know, you always kind of take the past with you a little bit when you go forward, but it's like
yeah.
I think the other leap to this life was how much Ivan hated mining, being underground.
Okay.
Everything about it.
Yeah, it's not even just that I like, it wasn't the mining itself I hated. It was just like yeah, well, there was that too, and just the environment, like
weird shift work.
Yeah, I don't want to shit on miners. Sorry, I guess I just dropped the S-bomb. I hope we can edit that out.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
You just spent 20 minutes saying about magic money.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's no big deal.
Your audience that you're targeting, but it's probably not 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
Yeah, that's fair.
It's like, I mean, we try to sort of talk in a way that appeals to everybody, but like maybe it's because of the amount of things that I've read and looked into, where to me talking about sort of a pseudo spiritual experience with ethnogens or whatever, to me that doesn't seem like too edgy. Like to me that's just like, I don't know, it's just an interesting thought, and maybe that's not how everybody feels about it. So maybe my tolerance for like what's weird or unacceptable is kind of high.
I think that's becoming more mainstream every day. Every day new research comes out how these compounds are helping us.
And having these open conversations with.
Also having these conversations definitely helps out as well.
Yeah.
All right, back to mining.
Yeah, so it's not that I just didn't like what it brought out in me, I guess. You know, there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of money to be made in mining. And when you're not making, was my son. And yeah, it just brings out in some people, myself, not your best self. And I didn't like that. And so I decided to just not do it. And there's a whole bunch of reasons. Some I'd just rather not get into.
Yeah, that's fine.
But
Yeah. But then then came 2014, and Ivan went to a business course, had the opportunity to take a business course called Learning Initiatives in Sudbury.
Yeah.
And so he spent however long.
There's a 42-week condensed course.
And through that was able to write a business plan. They helped him apply for an OHFC grant, like edited the grant and the business plan and just feedback throughout the whole thing. And then by 2015, we got grant approval to build the building.
That's right.
And it was under construction by that same year we started, but it wasn't really grow ready until Ivan calls it grow ready by 2017.
2017, yeah. So it took a while. There was a lot of bumps along the way. Some of them unexpected, like just trying to get insurance. was actually a pretty big hurdle that took us several months to be able to find somebody who would actually insure us.
And living where we live, finding contractors to do some of the work that Ivan couldn't do himself was a little bit trickier. But one of a great memory of the construction was we had all our friends and family out to do a barn raising kind of thing.
Yeah.
So our mushroom building, to paint a picture, is like a steel building. It's 1,200 square feet. It's well insulated. It's on a permanent pad, so we heat the pad with an outside wood boiler, so that we heat it using almost entirely renewable materials. And so this steel building, basically, we had the pad poured, and then we had everybody out to kind of construct this steel building. So that was really cool. So it was like, it's 14 feet peaks. So yeah, everyone was just like, I know. It was a great weekend. We invited people up for one day, expecting that like we would be working on it for the remainder of the week. And
we actually only put 2 pieces together that day.
And then everybody came, put the pieces together, and then some people like wanted to come back the following day, just because like they just loved helping us. And
it was very nice.
Yeah, it was just a really cool community and family spirit. So so then we were at Grow Ready in 2017. The building itself has everything you need to grow. So we did a lot of things wrong with the building and a lot of things right. So we have a certified kitchen in there. So we're able to, like, any excess mushrooms we have, we can dry or do whatever we want with. Like we just made a mushroom soup over the holidays and froze that. Lots of different products that we have like to use with our mushrooms. Hold on, you can't make that noise. And then we've got our lab space we talked about. So mushrooms need a sterile environment to start out anyways. So that lab is equipped with 2 laminar flow hoods now. We've got a room to incubate, and then a few rooms to actually fruit, and then a walk-in cooler. So that's our processing room, which is like the biggest room where we do the sterilizing of everything from grain to the wood to packing mushroom orders to
everything. It's a tight space. It's 1,200 square feet, and we fit all that into it. So sometimes
so when I say we didn't do everything right, like, storage definitely was not considered enough for what, but I think in a lot of ways it's good because we probably were under ambitious as to what the amount of mushrooms we could grow in this space, and ambitious as to them, or like under estimated the market potential too.
And also like ingenuity comes out of necessity, right?
Yeah.
So everything that we didn't quite think out, we've had to find workarounds or just so kind of a silver lining to the whole thing.
Well, it's kind of fun when you're trying to do something new and you start off first where you have no idea what to do, and then you sort of get an idea and you start going forward. And as you go forward, like you said, the necessity thing, it teaches you something, right? It's like, oh, I have to do this thing and nobody else is going to do it. So now I have to learn how to do this. And it's actually those challenges that kind of build up the character of who you become in a way too. And it sort of sounds like that maybe like doing what you're doing now is maybe more fulfilling in some capacity than what you were doing before. And maybe that's the added value that you get out of it. I think that seems common in everyone that we've talked to so far. It seems like there is a deep sense of fulfillment in this sort of idea of being more in line with nature. Symbiotic is the word I was looking for, with nature, where you're kind of living with nature. Or like for us, for example, like we've been trying to locally source all of our food for, I guess, the last year. Really, we've got our freezer stocked up with local animals. We try to buy local veggies when we can, and we're just trying to be as local as we can, because we also believe too, with this idea of food security and stuff like that, that we really need to help support these people who are going out and doing this hard work and making sure we do have animals here. Mm-hmm. But it's like it's more fulfilling to me when I eat those animals. It just seems like it seems like a better way to be. It just seems like a more humane way to live in a sense. Like it feels good to me that I know that someone maybe is earning their living wage off of doing this, and then they're feeding me, and I'm like, there's a relationship there, and it seems more fulfilling. And I think I get that out of a lot of people that we talk to that are sort of in this space, to the degree that it's like one space.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. And actually, while you were saying that, I thought, so in addition to all like the nutritive value of all these foods, you get this additional nutrition where you feel like you're supporting someone. You feel good about the food you're eating. Not only is the food you're eating good, and I think it's arguable that it's higher in nutrition because it spends less time traveling. It's fresher. Not only is it more nutritious, but you also feel good about it. So I wonder, like, to what degree that plays a role in
Your mental health,
yeah, and
or
you're
your
just feeling healthy
well-being.
about it, or just not feeling healthy, being healthy, actual.
It would almost be like how they have for a control, they always have the placebo group, right? Because there's some people, when you have a test of a new drug, you got to have a group of people that believe they're getting the drug, that aren't actually getting the drug. And even some of the people who don't get the drug will show improvement because they believe they're getting something that will help them improve. So maybe there is something behind the intentionality of it, right? When you have that food on your plate, you look at it and you remember, oh, I got this chicken from Hapa Flocka or whatever, right? And you're like, you remember seeing them and you remember all that, and then you eat the food. Maybe it's almost like sort of like the idea of grace, where you give thanks for your food, right? You're sort of bringing that into the actual buying of the food too. And it's not necessarily like consciously you're doing it, but even by acting it out, you are doing some form of that. But I think maybe that's part of the nutrition that's added to it that way too, where maybe, it's all in your head, but maybe that's not a zero sum. You know what I mean?
That's right.
You said you got into doing this as well because you were looking at like a more self-reliance lifestyle and everything. So do you guys do anything else at your farm that's kind of supporting you guys?
So all of our garden beds now have, we have a pretty good big garden. Some years it varies, that be bigger depending on how crazy the kids are and how much time they spend at home. But all of our gardens have mushrooms in them now. So every bed has Kingstropharia. We have buried maitake logs or very reishi logs. Some of our garden beds now are actually just made up of mushroom compost blocks. So it's wood blocks, and then we top our compost with it. But yeah, so we garden a lot. Our animals are all gone now. We did all the small game, like laying hens, and we had rabbits for a little while.
Yeah, I guess it's worth mentioning that when we started the whole thing, the intention was to do everything. Have animals, have market gardens, have mushrooms. And then it became painfully obvious that that was a lot to balance when you're first starting out. And given like the steep learning curve of all those things, but for me, going from like growing an amount of mushrooms for just our consumption to growing like a small scale commercial amount, there just a steep learning curve. So anyways, we put everything off. All the animals were, we got rid of everyone. The market garden we do for personal, so we don't, if we have to let it go 1 year because we're super busy or something comes up, we don't have to feel bad about not having that as part of our revenue. But we do raise animals for ourselves here because we have the property.
Now that we're a little more established in our growing, to start doing that again. We did have laying hens last year, but they're all gone now. And we just started doing chickens again, meat chickens for ourselves. But no other, definitely no other business things, but we're always trying to homestead,
your lifestyle, right?
And build.
Yeah.
So our neighbor is doing pork, like a few houses down. So I love to make soap as one of my homesteading activities. So we just traded a bunch of lard and for bird feeders and soap. And I just gave her a whole bunch of soap back as kind of like a nice exchange and trade. And so I think we definitely do that. A lot of other aspects. Next year, hopefully we'll be getting, it actually goes great with our mushroom compost because like I said, it's all made out of wood and the mushrooms are degrading the wood. But there's not as much nitrogen in them at that point. So we're going to top the beds with another neighbor does cattle. So we'll get some compost manure from them and top the beds and do some hugel mounds. That hopefully the mushrooms will keep breaking down that wood as they're capped and kind of heating the beds.
So just to step back from that, the blocks that we grow on, that's what we're going to be building our hugel mounds with. Are you guys familiar with hugel mounds?
No.
Well, I guess I could just clear it up too for anybody who's listening who might not be familiar with it. Basically, it's a buried log, or it's a mound of soil, but in the center you have like woody material.
Right.
And the idea there is that it provides heat, provides habitat for microorganisms,
invertebrates,
yeah,
and that it degrades slowly, right? So
Yeah.
that's why it's usually woody material, not just like manure or something like that.
Yeah,
That
that's right.
doesn't
So
generate heat for it generates heat quickly, but not extended
yeah,
period.
also water retention
And then it
increases.
lifts up your bed. So it's also the practical function of
Yeah.
it being like, if you fill, rather than like soil is fairly hard to come by unless happen to be very fortunate and live by like, a farm that is
Or you produce it
producing
yourself.
like a lot of compost, but so filling it with like a woody waste material also elevates it, so you've got these nice raised beds, and potentially they could be as like shoulder level, so that you're harvesting things that are not low to the ground, digging carrots out of the ground.
Instead of using the trees or logs to fill out the center of those hugel mounds, that's what Brittany was saying. We're using our spent blocks. So the wood substrate that we create after we've done a couple flushes off them, a few flushes, we then put them in the center of, we build these beds with them. And
Right.
that's what she's saying. We're gonna cover those beds with
Like compost and compost manure, and have those as our garden beds in the spring. Hopefully they should be ready now. So but
yeah, they're a little ways from being ready, but definitely something that we're looking forward to doing.
So every year we add more gardens, more stuff like that, more fruit trees.
More fruit trees is one. That was the hardest thing to really come to terms with, because you buy, so anybody who gets into this has this romantic notion of farming, right?
Yep.
Unless you grew up on a farm, I feel like there's not a complete understanding of the work that you need to do to get that outcome, that final product. Oh shoot, I don't even know what I was going into with that.
I said
Oh,
fruit trees, and then
yeah, just like doing all these things, getting a little bit done each year, as opposed to trying to do it all in one year. Coming to terms with that was hard, because you have these ideas, this grand notion of what it's going to be, and you want it to be that now.
Yeah.
But like mental health wise, you just have to embrace the fact that it's going to take a few years before you get there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you get to enjoy the ride a little bit better too.
Yeah. You get to be more present.
Yeah.
As opposed to.
That's one thing we learned. We've got a lot of different types of animals, and grew up gardens and garden sheds to support them and things like that all over the place when we first bought our farm, and then quickly realized, oh, this isn't like the best functionality or the best flow. So a lot of those kinds of things, then, this animals maybe like need something different than what we can give them, but without spending thousands of dollars, we're not going to be able to get there. So a lot of the animals we sold or got rid of, and have simplified. And now are a lot more thoughtful and intentional
Yeah.
as we expand and like plan out these things. And we try and usually are a lot more thoughtful when it comes to living things. So like you can plant a garden bed somewhere and then decide, like we're
Yeah.
gonna move this or whatever. Like, but now when it comes to like the living things, you're like, we want to have it like a really good setup now.
Yeah.
We don't want to just learn on the fly
More
anymore.
proactive than reactive.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that
But,
definitely makes a lot of sense. And like you said too, having to refocus in a sense and build in on that core of what you're trying to do, and then start expanding out from that again. You start to look at too, like, well, how can I make this fit in here where it's not a big stress adder, but I get a lot of value out of it? Or, you know, what's an output that I can put into this new thing that I want to be doing now? And so it's like an emergent project after you kind of get started doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, we know so many farmers in the area now too, that we also eat almost entirely local within what we can, right? Like fruit and things like that are kind of tricky. And we have kids that just like,
Yeah, nobody's growing mangoes yet. I don't get it.
yeah.
Huge market, guys. Anybody listening to
Yeah.
this?
So, you know, berry farmers and stuff like that we're really fortunate to have close, but and those freeze pretty good, but you know, other things as well that you can send in lunches and things. And so we try and focus on the things that people aren't doing really well already in our area. Like, you know, we've got a lot of carrot and potato farmers and things like that, or certain specialty produce that we can't really get, you know. Our friends also grow lettuce hydroponically year round. So we're not going to like struggle with those kinds of trickier things, but
Well,
there's
that's a good point too. Yeah. Cause like then if you say start out in the beginning, like you want to do everything and you realize that's kind of hard to do that. And then as you get more involved in the community, you realize, oh, well, maybe I actually don't have to worry about, say, growing lettuce. I don't have to worry about growing potatoes, but hey, I really like having peppers. So I'll have a garden here that grows all my peppers. And so then it's actually cool too, because then you end up fitting right into a community right there too. And there's a natural relationship between helping each other fill each other's wants and needs.
Yeah.
That's a principle in permaculture, actually. Like communities is one of your main principles in that, and exactly for that reason. You don't have to do everything. If somebody else is already doing it, you want to be self-sustainable. If you have a community, you know, we can lean on each other. What you're not good at, I might be good at. Yeah, so that goes a long way. And that's the other thing about like podcasts like podcasts. It's just a podcast. It's a podcast, yeah. Just connecting all these folks with each other that maybe haven't connected, and just going a long way to creating a community. Like I feel we have a really good thing in our area. Yeah. Some of the folks at market have told me oftentimes, you know, oh, my daughter's living in Ottawa or they're living here, whatever, and the farmers out there don't have what the farmers here have. Like I've heard them say, like, we have a lot of CSA style boxes here. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily just, you know, you get veggies that week, but some of the farmers are organizing and they're actually prepping food. Yeah. So using local ingredients. Mm-hmm. And
partnering.
And all these different partnerships are forming and collaborations. So thank you for that.
That's what we're trying to do. Like for us, like to me, like I think I really want that to be the case here. Like it's you're right, we're lucky and we're happy that this happens to be a place where there's a lot of the good roots already there for it. There's already like a fairly healthy community doing that. And my hope is that I can get people together talking to each other or expose people to, you know, what people are doing in the area. Because my hope is that maybe someone hears what you guys are doing and thinks, oh, maybe I could get a little block and try growing one batch of mushrooms. And then maybe that's something that enriches their life a little bit. And then they think, well, you know, maybe I could get involved in this farmer's market, and maybe they start buying stuff at the farmer's market, and that's great. So like I'm trying to figure out a way, and as best I can do right now is try to reach out to people and talk to people And I think part of what helps sell people on the idea of investing in this is talking to people like you.
Yeah.
And I think like your personality shines through. And I think also the fact it's like, I think a lot of people get really intimidated because there is the big picture at first, and then you start getting into it and then you're like, wow, this is really technical and I don't know if I can do any of this. And then I find as we're talking to people, we find a lot of people start off where that's exactly what happens. They take on too much, or they start off doing the wrong thing and they mess up, and then they learn and they get better. And to me, it's like a little, I'm kind of proving the concept by talking to all these people who are doing it. I think it's like sometimes I would get the impression that a lot of people believe it's not doable. And I think it's probably hard, but I think it might be something that's worth the investment. And I think if people can see it, I think they can believe in it. And I think that is some kind of currency in a way where if they believe in it, they'll put their money there. And that's what I'm hoping to cultivate when I talk to people who are kind of embarking on this journey.
Yeah.
So I hope that comes through when we're talking to people like you guys. And speaking of that, thank you guys for coming and talking to us. And could you guys let anyone who happens to listen to this know where they could get a hold of your mushrooms or reach you? Or
Yeah. Well, our website's probably the best site just because it lists all the different places that we attend for markets and where we sell our stuff. So it's the uglybarnfarm.com. And if you go to where to find us, or find us, I think is the button. Mostly Ivan and I ourselves are at the North Bay Farmers Market on Saturdays, and Ivan's in the Sudbury Market on Saturdays. But yeah, like for some people like to support us indirectly through attending these restaurants and ordering mushroom dishes that support us, or through a third party if they can't make it on Saturdays. So we've got like a Clip Fork or Seasons Pharmacy in Sudbury that also sell our mushrooms.
We also have the Green Shed out in the valley that's truly northern, so they have a lot of the dried products. Maple Acres over in Blind River, they have a lot of our shelf stable products as well.
Yeah, so there's a few avenues, and I think sending us a message or checking out the website or something like that's probably the best way. And and we, like you kind of alluded to it, we do produce mostly fresh mushrooms and products like that, but we are also because we have our lab space, we can produce all these grow supplies for people. So those that want to do their own mushroom growing,
dowels,
which are like another form of outdoor growing. There's a lot of different options for people and skill levels too. So the kits are from somebody that's never grown mushrooms. Kids can grow them to spawn or liquid cultures for those that have done the research and want to kind of take it to the next level, at least maybe for production themselves, not quite for sorry. Anyways, but so
check out your website then.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Well,
all right, well, thanks so much.
Thank you guys, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
both
nice
again. Guys, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
All right, take care.
Thank you guys too.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.